Nigel Farage quits as the leader of UKIP again. He says he's done his bit getting Britain out of the EU and couldn't possibly achieve more.
During the referendum campaign, I said, I want my country back. And what I'm saying today is I want my life back. And it begins right now.
Andrea Leadsom calls Brexit a great moment in history as she launches her bid for the Tory leadership. Also this lunchtime, the boy trapped in silence for 7 years learns to communicate using his eyes. How a British-made rocket is closing in on Jupiter at the end of a 1.4 billion-mile journey. And the rush to see the new favourites at Wimbledon as Andy Murray prepares for the 4th round.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Charlene White.
Good afternoon. He may have done it before, but this time Nigel Farage says he's quitting as leader of UKIP for good. At a press conference this morning, he told reporters he'd achieved his political aim of removing Britain from the European Union and wanted his life back. He also said the country now needed a Brexit Prime Minister, something the Conservative MP Andrea Leadsom is hoping to be. She launched her Tory leadership campaign just moments after Nigel Farage's surprise resignation. Our political correspondent Libby Vina reports on a morning of political manoeuvring.
Job done. The message from Nigel Farage today, insisting that having won the referendum, it was time for him to quit as UKIP's leader.
My aim in being in politics was to get Britain out of the European Union. That is what we voted for in that referendum 2 weeks ago. And that is why I now feel that I've done my bit, that I couldn't possibly achieve more than we managed to get in that referendum.
No question then of hanging on to help shape a post-Brexit Britain.
During the referendum campaign, I said, I want my country back. And what I'm saying today is I want my life back. And it begins right now. Thank you.
He'd quit before, but said this time he really meant it. But what did UKIP's only MP, Douglas Carswell, make of it? Despite an early rapport with Nigel, the two men had come to loathe each other. So would he now stand?
Absolutely not. I couldn't possibly be a constituency MP, represent UKIP in the House of Commons, and be a dad and lead a party.
But what of Nigel Farage's contribution to Brexit? One Tory Eurosceptic gave this tribute.
I think Nigel Farage has been a tremendously important political figure, that the campaign UKIP ran first to get a referendum and then to win the referendum has had a deep effect on this country. For somebody who's never been elected to Parliament, he's probably had more effect on British politics than any other non-MP.
Meanwhile, Andrea Leadsom has thrown her hat in the ring to be Tory leader and Prime Minister, saying freedom of movement was non-negotiable.
The result is final. It must be respected, and I will respect it. The United Kingdom will leave the European Union. Freedom of movement will end.
But what about EU nationals already here?
And I commit today to guaranteeing the rights of our EU friends who have already come here to live and work.
That went down well with her supporters, but it contrasts with warnings from those who back her rival, the Home Secretary Theresa May, that such a plan might encourage an influx of migrants ahead of any deal.
So, Libby, Nigel Farage says he's leaving for good this time. Was this always likely if the Leave vote won the referendum?
Well, I don't know. In some ways, it isn't unexpected in that Nigel Farage did try to resign after the last general election and then made a comeback. I think there were signs then that he wanted to quit politics in Britain. But I think it is a surprise in another way, in the sense that having won what he said was his lifetime's ambition, that he wanted to depart the scene and do something else. I think that many people might have expected him to want to have a say in what sort of post-Brexit Britain emerges. And I think it does lend weight to the idea that UKIP actually is a one-issue party. I think the big question now, is it also a one-man party? I was at Nigel Farage's last main rally before the referendum vote, and I have to say, in the northeast, that is, it was a very popular event. There were many hundreds of people who attended it, and I think in that part of the country, UKIP was doing very well indeed, coming second in many parliamentary seats. I think the challenge for anyone who takes over from Nigel Farage is whether that can be repeated, whether it can establish itself as a party that can win votes and seats at a national election.
Libby, thank you. Well, while the Tories and UKIP look for a new leader, there isn't yet a vacancy at the head of the Labour Party, despite 170 Labour MPs saying they've lost confidence in Jeremy Corbyn. Today, Angela Eagle suggested she might launch a leadership challenge if he doesn't stand down. Well, our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is outside the Labour Party headquarters for us. And Carl, it's been a week since most of his shadow cabinet resigned. Is there likely to ever be a formal challenge to his leadership?
Only if he doesn't step down, but I think it will come if he doesn't step down. He's lost the support of so much of his parliamentary party. He can't even put together a full shadow cabinet, and Angela Eagle has said that she is willing to challenge him, and she repeated that as she left home this morning.
It's a week since Jeremy lost that vote of no confidence, and there are many other people up and down the country wanting him to consider his position. He's not properly engaged with even the deputy leader of the party, who was elected with a mandate too. It's now time that he did so. There are many people, MPs, party members up and down the country asking me to resolve this impasse, and I will if something isn't done soon.
Now, there has been talk of Jeremy Corbyn and his team offering some kind of a deal to Labour MPs. Let me tell you, rebels I've been speaking to in the Labour Party see that as a sign of weakness. They're not about to accept that deal. They think it shows that he is on his way out. They think he may be hanging on to deliver his verdict on the Chilcot report, which comes on Wednesday. I would expect if he hasn't stood down by the end of the week, there will be a challenge.
Carl, thank you. The number of people killed in Sunday's suicide bomb attack in the Iraqi capital Baghdad has risen to 165. Hundreds more were injured in the blast. Many are thought to be children. Today, the clean-up continues in the district of Karada, while the Iraqi government has declared 3 days of national mourning for the victims. The so-called Islamic State says it was behind the attack. Well, our correspondent Dan Rivers is in Iraq and sent this update a short time ago.
Well, as that clear-up continues in Baghdad, the scale of that bombing is becoming ever clearer. It appears to be the most deadly attack in Iraq since 2007. Because of the timing of the attack late at night after people were breaking their fast for Ramadan, entire families, it's emerged, had been wiped out by this tragedy. And of course, now the big question is, where will Islamic State strike next? It appears that this is in response to the Iraqi army moving into Fallujah and putting pressure on them, perhaps some of those Islamic State fighters reverting to the guerrilla tactics that they've perfected over so many months, which means in cities like Basra, where I am now, a predominantly Shiite city, there are concerns clearly that they may be targeted next. Extra security patrols have been ordered by the Prime Minister, who himself is embattled at the moment as people vent their anger as he visited the scene of the Baghdad bombing, furious that his government is still unable to guarantee their security.
Dan Rivers reporting there from Iraq. There are calls for better training for doctors to help them treat people with autism. A survey by the Westminster Commission found autism in many people living with autism feel like they get inadequate treatment. The UK doesn't have mortality figures for those with autism, but a Swedish report suggests they die 16 years earlier. Sally Bidoff has more.
Craig Kennedy has autism. He also has 5 children and a busy life. But like other people living with autism, he says the NHS isn't equipped to deal properly with people on the spectrum. A recent visit to A&E with breathing difficulties left him incredibly anxious.
The noise was very stressful for me. I had a nurse tell me to take a seat in a room that was no bigger than basically a bed and a chair. I took a seat on the chair, and she shouted at me because she wanted me on the bed. I then basically became distressed and left the hospital to go to another nearby A&E to basically be assessed and treated.
And Craig's experience is not isolated. The newly formed Westminster Commission on Autism spoke to 900 autistic people, their relatives and health professionals. 74% of them said those with autism received worse health care than those without the condition. And 65% said health professionals did not understand how autism affects mental and physical health. The Commission wants change and is recommending better leadership, a database of those with autism, and crucially, autism awareness training for all doctors and nurses.
GPs need training, partly just to actually recognise that an individual might have autism in the first instance, because a lot of people with autism haven't got a diagnosis. So the reason it's important for them to recognise it is both so that they can maybe help the person have a further assessment and get a diagnosis, which can help them in all fields of life.
With between 1% and 2% of the population somewhere on the autistic spectrum, this is an issue that affects thousands of people. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
Still to come, how a British-made rocket is closing in on Jupiter, and the pressure of expectation for Andy Murray as he prepares for the 4th round at Wimbledon. A 10-year-old boy who was born with severe cerebral palsy and was written off as unteachable is now writing poems and blogs after being taught to communicate by his mum. Jonathan Bryan is unable to walk or speak, but now uses his eyes to pick out letters on a letterboard. He's written to the Education Secretary calling for more help in schools for disabled children. Rupert Evelyn went to meet him and his family today.
Unlocked and able to communicate with his family and helpers, Jonathan Bryan has proved that a label does not need to stick. Understanding how to understand him wasn't achieved at school, but at home, where his mother Chantal worked out Jonathan could spell out words with his eyes.
And it was wonderful. It was really wonderful to be able to talk to him properly, ask him anything, and for him to be able to talk to us back for the first time, age 9, to talk to your son. It was beautiful.
The result is a 10-year-old now able to express himself, which many believe to be almost impossible for someone with profound and multiple learning difficulties.
And mustn't be inhibited by the label PMLD.
Jonathan is determined to put his voice to use. He's not only blogging, but he wants change and has set up a petition calling on the government to recognise that his difficulties and those of others should not be a label that prevents learning and communicating.
I'd like to have enough signatures on my petition that it is discussed in Parliament.
Jonathan's mother thinks he was written off in school.
Educationally, I think there's a poverty of ambition for children like Jonathan, and there was no aspiration that he might be able to read or write, and there wasn't enough put in to actually investigate whether he had the mental capacity to do it.
Unlocking those perceived to be locked in won't work for all, but Jonathan and his family have friends who they believe can also achieve what they've done. Making it happen, though, is about willingness, and they believe that that is in short supply. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Wiltshire.
Since the vote to leave Europe last month, it's safe to say there have been many more questions than answers about the economy, the cost of living and what happens now. An ITV Tonight investigation has revealed what people are most worried about. The main concerns are the price of the weekly shop rising and mortgage costs going up. But Brits are also nervous about the price of their holidays going up as well. Our consumer editor Chris Troy joins me. So Chris, so many worries for people out there at the moment. Tell us about this research that you've been doing.
You're right about the worries. People feel kind of bombarded by all of this Brexit. Thousands of people were asked what their main consumer concerns were about the situation. And let me just show you the results because they're fascinating. On that subject of food prices that you mentioned there, 37% of shoppers fear rising costs. 31% are worried about the price of household bills, mainly things like petrol. And 25% of people in our Brexit survey for the impact on mortgages and interest rates. On that food issue that's worrying so many people, that's all because our food imports are shaped by the EU. Going it alone, we might not have the same trade deals. What should you do? We actually held an information roadshow. One of the experts on that says we should think about our future budgets. Here's Iona Will talking to a member of the public and answering their question.
I think it's probably safe to predict that there's going to be a rise in the cost of everyday goods. We have seen food prices fall in recent years. We may see a reversal in that now. It's the cost of imported goods. It's bound to have some effect. So what I would say is play safe, account maybe for 2 to 3% rise in the cost of goods, and see whether or not you've got enough left over at the end of the month to be able to cushion that blow.
Well, with these questions, you said 25% of people said that they're worried about their mortgage. So is it going to go up?
Well, the experts are pretty split. Some saying rates could go up if inflation takes hold. Others say they could go down to stimulate the economy. One thing seems sure already, which is that if you're about to go through a property transaction, that uncertainty is having an impact. In Oldham, I met a couple going through that at the moment, Vicky and Andrew Marshall. Here they are.
Somebody further up that's out of our control could either pause to hang on, see what may happen, or decide to stay where they are and break the chain, so to speak, and it collapses around us.
It's just another very real example about how real lives are being affected. There are lots of questions. We'll be doing a Q&A session on Facebook tonight from 8:30. So if you have any questions, we'll try and get you answers on the ITV New Facebook page.
OK, thanks very much, Chris. Well, you can watch the programme Brexit, What Does It Mean for You? Here on ITV at 8 o'clock tonight. And if you've already changed your spending habits or are worried for the future, do let us know by emailing your story at itv.com or via our Facebook or Twitter page. After a 5-year journey covering 1.4 billion miles, NASA's Juno space probe is due to reach Jupiter in the early hours of tomorrow morning. Its mission to understand how the planet was formed and how weather systems there help produce the planet's characteristic red spot. It launched back in 2011 on a mission that cost more than £1 billion. It spent the last 5 years travelling around the Sun and Mars before making its way to Jupiter. Now, Juno is entering the most critical phase of its mission as the probe has to slow down just enough to enter Jupiter's orbit. If it's successful, it will spend the next 18 months gathering information about the largest planet in our solar system. Well, the probe is powered by British-made rockets, actually, designed and made in Aylesbury. Our science editor, Alok Shah, is there for us now. Alok, are there a few nerves there this afternoon?
Well, Charlene, right behind me is a replica, well, actually an updated version of the rocket that's actually got such an awesome responsibility on Juno this evening. And yes, it was designed here in Buckinghamshire, and I'm with site manager of Moog Westcott, the company that designed it, Rob Selby. Rob, are you nervous right now?
Well, I think there's a mixture of nerves and excitement currently. The spacecraft has to decelerate by 1,200 miles an hour to be captured by Jupiter's orbit. The engine is responsible for that. There's one engine, it has to fire exactly the right time, exactly the right amount of time, and in exactly the right orientation. Consequently, it's all on this engine.
Well, so if it all goes well, which I'm sure it will, then Juno has an awesome responsibility to do over the next 2 years in its mission. It's going to look at something. It's going to look at the red spot in Jupiter, something we've all seen in pictures. It's going to work out whether that's just an atmospheric phenomenon or something that goes deep into Jupiter's core. It's going to work out what the core of Jupiter's made of. Is it solid? Is it liquid? What's in there? We've never been able to penetrate the surface of Jupiter from this planet before, and all of that will tell scientists when and how Jupiter was made in the early solar system. Because if you want to know how the solar system was made, if you want to know how the Earth is made, you need to understand Jupiter, the largest planet. And if you want to know especially what the conditions on Earth were like when the Earth was made and when life started, you need to study Jupiter. So we'll be seeing that starting in 12 hours' time and hopefully for the next 2 years as well.
OK, Alok, thanks very much. Wales are gearing up for the biggest football match in the country's history. In 2 days' time, they take on Portugal, of course, in the Euro 2016 semi-final. And Gareth Bale will go head-to-head with his Real Madrid teammate, Cristiano Ronaldo. The team seemed relaxed in training this morning, as you can see, and Bale played down any competition with Ronaldo.
It's not about two players. We know that, everybody knows that really. It's about two nations in a semi-final, 11 men against 11 men. It's going to be a very difficult game. We know that. They're in the semi-final for a reason.
And finally, Andy Murray is due on court in the 4th round of Wimbledon this afternoon, knowing he's now the big favourite to win the tournament for the 2nd time. Novak Djokovic's defeat over the weekend, of course, means Murray is the highest-ranked player left in the draw. But he has a tough match today against the Australian Nick Kyrgios. Well, Richard Pallow is at Wimbledon for us. Richard.
Well, there's always pressure on Andy Murray, but now there is expectation. He has never been the overwhelming favourite for this tournament so early in it, because Novak Djokovic has often been so. He is out, and Roger Federer, who's still in and is on court at the moment, is not quite the player that he once was. Now, Murray has already been inside. He has been practising on the courts, didn't stop to talk to anyone ahead of his game later today against Australia's Nick Kyrgios. The pair are very good friends. Kyrgios has some very big weapons, very big shots, and also, dare I say it, a very big mouth. He's often got into trouble, he's often outspoken, but he could well give Murray his toughest match if he is to reach the final ahead of it. This is what some of the fans had to say.
I think he's got a great chance. I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
I think Murray will be too good for him. I think he'll just have too much for him. Kyrgios will get angry like he normally does, and Murray will have him in 4 sets.
I think it's going to take 4 sets, but I'm confident he's going to do it.
And of course I'm here to support Murray because, yeah, he has a chance this year, so yeah.
One other issue making the headlines, that of players' towels. A senior official has been quoted as saying way too many of them go missing. Up to 3/4 of the 6,000 towels do. Serena Williams has been cited as the very worst culprit. We know that Andy Murray's wife likes one, though I suspect she may prefer it if he returns home on Sunday with something gold, solid, trophy-like and a bit shinier.
Richard, thank you. That's it from us. We'll see you again at 6:30. Goodbye.